welcome to Distant Echoes, New Mexico special episode number 3, Hispanic Witchcraft in the Southwest. Just as a quick note before we get into the episode, those Azova pictures are finally up on the website. See the show notes for the link. Moving on to the episode. From Mark Simmons, Witchcraft in the Southwest, quote, "It is quite easy and indeed fashionable for modern man to dismiss folk medicine, witchcraft, and other forms of supernaturalism as unadulterated humbuggery, and yet who at present is so well versed in all things that he can pretend to know the extent of the power of belief." End quote. Since it's October, I want to take a quick break from the main history narrative to talk about some aspects of things you might call New Mexican folklore. Figured we'd start with witchcraft. This will be part of 4 episodes covering various aspects of witchcraft in the Southwest, focusing on some of the different cultural groups in New Mexico. I'll be trying to release an episode every week for the month of October before we get back to our regular schedule. To start with, though, we need to define what witchcraft is. It's a hard thing to pin down depending on who you ask and their background. Is it solely for selfish and malicious purposes, like among the Apache? Are curanderos witches? What about if the same practices are used against specific groups, such as an outgroup? Does that make it still witchcraft, or is it now good magic? It's really complicated. So, for the purpose of this episode, I'm going to use an extremely broad definition of witchcraft. Witchcraft is a cultural practice to inflict harm, describe the cause of sudden illnesses, or enrich oneself by relying on supernatural means. Furthermore, in certain cultural contexts, a witch can also be someone who leans on the supernatural to heal people. This first episode will mostly focus on Hispanic witchcraft, which can be broken down into the following 3 categories. White magic, which is mostly quote-unquote good magic. This is most obvious in the form of a curandera, which is a type of folk healer. Red magic, which is bewitching magic. The best example of this is something like a love potion. And finally, black magic, which would be your quote-unquote evil magics, mostly associated with death. This could be something that makes someone progressively more ill. Usually this stems from the devil or other practices that break from Catholic orthodoxy. A potential witch gets their power in one of 3 ways. They're either born with it, taught it by some form of mentor, perhaps at a school for witchcraft. These are called arbularias. Or they can sell their soul to the devil in exchange for supernatural power. Usually those who sold their soul would work in groups, meeting at a witch's Sabbath. In Europe, the Sabbath was usually scheduled. In the Southwest, however, no specific schedule exists. Tuesdays and Fridays, though, were often considered witch days. Stories of these Sabbaths usually contain the following elements. They take place in a remote area. There's dancing, feasting, and merrymaking. There's a goat whose tail was to be kissed, a snake, and they usually lasted all night. For example, in Witchcraft in the Southwest, Mark Simmons provides the following example of a witch's Sabbath. Quote, Charles Loomis, while collecting witch stories along the upper Rio Grande in the 1880s, learned of a man named Patapalo, who was something of the village idiot in San Mateo. One day a friend, Jose, approached him and said, "Patapalo, why are you so stupid? Come with me tonight, I will make you the wisest man in the world, so that you can play any music, speak any language, and even know what happens 100 miles away." Any Hispano but a simpleton would have recognized at once that this was an open invitation to become a witch. But Patapalo innocently fell into the trap, and later he revealed to Loomis the particulars of his unnerving experience. That night, about 8 o'clock, Jose came for me, and we started walking across the plain. After a half hour, we found 10,000 mesquite bushes, and on each one hung a rosary. I was often there before, but I never saw a single mesquite. I said, "What is this thing?" But Jose replied, "Keep your tongue to your teeth and come on." At that moment, we came to a great door with an iron lock, and a voice from within called, "Who's there?" Jose said, "We are 2. One is ignorant." Then the door opened, and we went into a room, so large I could not see the end of it. There was a bright light, and I saw hundreds of people, the men on one side and the women on the other. Many of them I knew from Socorro and other places. In the middle were dozens of musicians with all classes of instruments, and when they played very fine music, the men and women danced together. Such fine dancers I have never seen. Then a very large goat came in and spoke to all, and everybody had to kiss him. And then when the goat had gone, there was a snake, larger body than mine, that came in upright, and it moved to every man and wound itself around him and put its tongue in his mouth, and the same to every woman. And when he did so, they talked words that I could not understand. But when he came to me and put his face before mine, my heart left me, and I cried, "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, save me." And in that instant I was standing alone in the plain. The snake, Jose, and the people were gone. There remained only a strong smell of sulfur. I walked home a long way, very much alarmed. Next day I saw Jose, and he said, "Fool, the snake was ready to give you the tongue of wisdom, but you called the holy name and ruined all." He wanted me to go again, but I was afraid and never did again. End quote. While Patapalo didn't stay all night due to invoking the saints, there are many elements that make this story fit the mold to describe a witch's Sabbath, as we discussed above. The powers of witches are broad. For instance, they could curse someone. From Brujas, Bultos, y Brazas, Tales of Witchcraft and Supernatural in the Pecos Valley, quote, "My uncle Vicente from Villa Nueva was a storyteller, and then Mamalita also told stories, but she was not as funny as my Uncle Vicente. But the one who really narrated stories was a man named Severo, I believe, or my own Uncle Vicente, one of the two. Around these parts, people also used to talk a lot about a brother of Rafael Salinas. Let me see if I can remember what his name was. I never knew him. No, I don't know what his name was. But he was a Salinas. He used to hide down in the arroyo. He'd come out and scare away thieves until sooner or later the kids were no longer afraid of him. Mamalita used to say that. I believe that was that place people called El Torreon. Right behind it, there were some small houses. That's where this man from Villanueva lived. Let me see. I believe his name was also Vicente, but it wasn't my Uncle Vicente, the one who told stories, but his father instead, or something like that. Rumor has it that someone put a curse on him. And I understand they went home and got very mean with his wife, and he told her that he was going to kill her if she didn't cure him of the oversized nose he had developed. Why, there's nothing wrong with you, she'd say to him. Well, listen, if you don't get me well, he'd curse her to no end. So she went, and all she did was fetch some ashes from the pot-bellied stove and applied them to his nose, and he got better. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But that's what people used to say. Another time I remember my father telling me about a man, a gentleman who had been bewitched. When this man was on the road, his nose swelled up a lot, and he grabbed a stick, a cudgel. He headed for the home of the woman who bewitched him. He arrived at her house and implored her to open the door, and she didn't want to. But finally she did. But whenever he traveled on the road, so the story goes, owls and who knows what else would get in front of him. Then he supposedly said to her, "Open up," and he swore at her. She opened the door for him, and he wanted her to cure him to get well. "Why, there's nothing wrong with you," she kept saying to him. But she went, she had an adobe fireplace, and grabbed some ashes, wet them, and rubbed them on his nose, and he got well. That's what my dad used to tell me. That's what they told him. He himself did not see it. Another occasion I went to play in Pecos, and then while there I started getting lots of welts. My mouth really swelled up. My stepmother applied a cloth to the welts and then took me to an herbalist, and the swelling went away. All the herbalist did was tell her to put mountain water on the windowsill, and then for a little boy to come and make the sign of the cross, for him to bless me. And there you are. It went away. The spell never came back. And the reason for my trouble, the little boy told me, is that I supposedly promised a couple of women I would marry them, and then I copped out. He thought they were the ones who had bewitched me. End quote. Beyond just minor illnesses, bewitching could take many more forms, such as a love potion or a curse so bad it could kill someone, often had the victim wasting away. Some other powers witches had included the ability to travel great distances in a single night. Another one from Brujas, Potos, y Brasas, quote, "My uncle Toribio, my dad's younger brother, used to tell some horrible stories about witches. Once upon a time he was in Colorado, working, when a woman showed up, whereupon he said to her, 'I want to go back home to a dance. If you promise to return by midnight, I'll take you,' she said to him. The dance was here in Villanueva. He said to her, 'Yes, I promise to return as you suggest. I just want to go make the rounds.' It was somebody's wedding. Well, I understand, this woman propped him on top of a goat, and she said to him, 'Without God and without Saint Mary.' He was like in a dream. The goat was like flying. In an instant he was at the dance. Then, when he left the dance, he had to say those same words, 'Without God and without Saint Mary.' And as he said that, the goat suddenly appeared, and then he hopped on it once again. It was 11:30 when the goat flew back to Colorado. I don't know if it was a story that he made up, but I'm telling you, there were lots of jokes about witches." End quote. Again, that story is pretty typical for a witch's abilities, and variations of this story showed up a bunch in my research. Sometimes the goat was a donkey, sometimes you had to sit on whichever animal it was backwards, but pretty consistently you'd see the phrase "Sin Dios y sin Santa Maria," or "Without God and without Saint Mary." Sometimes a witch would even use an ointment, or a broom, gourd, or fireball, all sorts of other things they could use to fly. Another ability that showed up a lot was the ability to take on the shape or characteristics of an animal. Cat's eyes were a particular favorite of these stories, but any animal part could be used to facilitate a witch's work. From Witchcraft in the Southwest, quote, "One night, Juan Perea, a notorious male witch who died in San Mateo in 1888, sallied forth on a nocturnal ramble after depositing his eyes in a saucer on the kitchen table and borrowing those of a cat. While he was away, his hungry dog upset the table and gobbled up his eyes, leaving Juan to spend the rest of his life wearing the green eyes of the cat." End quote. This story is another common one where a witch loses their eyes in some mishap. It varies, but it's still a consistent theme of the witch borrows a cat's eyes or some other animal's eyes and loses their original. So they have a blind cat and they have cat's eyes. This doesn't, though, just stop at just borrowing the parts of an animal to facilitate their work. Southwestern witches can also assume the form of an animal, owls and cats being preferred. But this comes with risks. Like we'll see with some other witch practices, if wounded while in the form of an animal, the witch would have the corresponding wound when they turn back. Unlike what I'll term Anglo-witchcraft, that I'm guessing my listeners are more familiar with, owls may even be more associated with witches than cats are in Hispanic witchcraft in the Southwest. Let's talk about some tools with which a witch had to carry out their work. They had milk bottles in which they kept satanic works or small animals they could release for their evil needs. They could also use dolls or pictures to cast hexes. Furthermore, one could be bewitched by eating cursed food or drink that was offered to them. The lodestone also supposedly made magic easier, but for normal people it could also be a protection or a love charm. For witches, they had to feed and water it every Friday, and if it was stolen, it would kill them. Another persistent belief was that a lot of cures to evil magic turned back on the caster, giving them the negative effects they wish to inflict on others. Curse someone with a big nose, they cure it, well now you have the big nose. Let's talk about how you find a witch and cure the symptoms. The easiest preventative measure would be a staunch adherence to the Catholic orthodoxy. The cross itself was also a shield that could help ward off witchcraft. There's certain phrases, such like Alvarado en los dulces nombres de Jesús, María y José, which roughly translates to praise be the sweet names of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, or Madre Dios, would provide protection against witchcraft as well. Certain saints were also associated with protection from witchcraft. Now that we're protected from the witches, how can we find them? I'll relate one method I found commonly. First, you need to get someone named Juan, and you put him in a large circle with his shirt inside out and wait the night out. Any witch that comes near the circle gets caught in the circle and cannot leave, even if they are in the form of animal, which as soon as they get caught in the circle, they turn back to human. Sometimes Juan has to shout, "Venga bruja," or "Come witch," to capture them. Once a witch was caught, flogging was a common punishment. To cure oneself from witchcraft, several methods could be employed, such as the use of an egg in a dish to absorb the evil magic. Plants play a huge role in witchcraft, although mostly native witchcrafts, as we'll see in future episodes. Some other wards or cures could be things like calabacillas or squashes, and that's if they're placed in the homes or you can carry them. Hispano-herbalists are also divided into curanderos and arbularios. I'm going to use Mark Simmons' categorizations for each of these. He calls a curandero just a regular healer and an arbulario a witch doctor, although some other books lump these two categories together. Per Mark Simmons, curanderos won't often treat bewitchment. Again, though, sometimes they lump arbularios and curanderos together, so that's not a universal. Finally, sometimes magic and herbs are believed to be the only cure. Sometimes regular methods will also work. There's one last form of evil witchcraft that I want to talk about specifically related to Hispanic witchcraft in the Southwest. The mal ojo, or evil eye. The evil eye is the cause of many symptoms, everything from a bad fever to death. Anyone could inflict the mal ojo. It stems from intense negative emotions, usually jealousy or envy. Although for those more susceptible, even just a strong gaze could cause issues. Children are usually the target, and as for curing it, there's a swath of different cures. I saw everything from patting someone's head and rubbing their temples to agua de boca, which I never really got a clear description of what that was, to using an egg in a bowl. Jet or coral bead necklaces were thought to help ward off the evil eye as well. In closing, I want to share one last story of witchcraft that's more history than witchcraft stories, but I just couldn't find a good way to fit it into the main narrative. In the 1670s, German Bernardo Gruber would get in trouble for selling magic papers. He would write an incantation on these papers, and if you swallowed the paper, supposedly you'd be made invincible. Folks tried it out, said they were actually invincible, then they got scared and they'd bring it to the attention of the agent of the Inquisition, who would arrest Gruber. According to Gruber, this practice was common in 1600s Germany, and he would rot in his prison cell in Abo for a few years. But eventually, with the help of an Apache servant, he would break out of jail and flee down the Camino Real towards Mexico. A group of militiamen and the Pueblo allies would give chase, but they would not find him. Later, travelers found a horse tethered to a tree and a skeleton that they marked as being Gruber's corpse. The agent of the Inquisition at the time, Father Bernal, was to auction the peddler's wares to bury the body. And this is how the Jornada del Muerte, 90-mile stretch we've talked about a lot in this show, got its name, was actually from this guy's death. I think with that, though, we'll bring our discussion of Hispanic witchcraft to a close, and we'll continue next week with Pueblo witchcraft. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with your friends. Leave a review on your podcast app of choice if it lets you. Since I'm a Luddite and don't use social media, word of mouth and reviews are the only way the show spreads. We have a website located at engineeringfire.org. That's spelled engineeringfire.org, where I have a link in the header for podcast resources, including pictures, companion posts, my bibliography, and the transcripts of each show. We have an email you can submit comments and questions to at michael@engineeringfire.org. The intro music is Desperados by Frank Schroeder and sourced from filmmusic.io. The outro music is NeoWestern from Kevin McLeod of Incompetech. Links to all things mentioned are present in the show notes and at the website. Thank you all so much for listening, and I will see you in the next episode.